Hi everyone. My name is Bryant Francis. I am down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Very small window today, but you can see me. You can get a glimpse of what my normally hidden face looks like. I am joined today, however, by four, count them four, larger faces above me. One of them is Alex Walrow. Alex, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Brian. I'm still Alex, editor at Gamasutra. Thanks to everyone here for joining us today.
Yeah. And along with Alex, I'm joined by Victor, Randy, and Vincent. Could each of you, and Victor, could you go first and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Viktor Antonov. I'm a concept designer, art director, and creative director, and currently working with Vincent and Randy and collaborating with their Wise Studios for one of their projects, an indie project. And there you go.
Randy, can you introduce yourself?
Hey there, I'm Randy Smith. I'm a game designer and also a creative director. I'm the one making the cat sounds on the feed, not me specifically, but we'll leave that a mystery about who's making the cat sounds. And yeah, I'm probably best known in the past for I started my career at Looking Glass Studios on the Thief series, moved to Ironstorm, Austin, Texas, to continue on the Thief series with games, and more recently I made an indie studio called Tiger Style, and we ship games like Waking Mars and Spider, The Secret of Bryce Manor, most recently Spider, Rite of the Shrouded Moon, and now I'm also working with these guys, Darewise, an executive production studio out of Paris.
And Vincent, can you introduce yourself?
Hi guys, Vincent Marty. I'm the executive producer here at Darewise, working on Rokh, and I used to run online division at Ubisoft prior to that.
Vincent, can you do me a favor? I did
Sure.
get to play some Rock last night, and sadly, just for the crowd, we Rock is a really interesting game, and we'd love to play it for you. However, my poor machine was not able to manage streaming it and running gameplay at the same time, and we're still working on a full PC streaming system, so we're just running some trailer footage for you as we talk to Victor, Randy, and Vincent. Vincent, could you introduce Rock for me? And I know there's a lot of ex-Ubisoft people behind it. Could you sort of talk about where it came from and why you all decided to make an early access crafting game on Mars?
Sure. The original idea is actually to the credit of Benjamin Charbit, our CEO at Darewise and creative director, original creative director on this project. It, we met with Benjamin while at Ubisoft, and we always talked about space and making games for PC very systemically and multiplayer online. And he came up with this idea of having after discovering a lot of mythology about Mars and space exploration, that it will be a perfect playground for survival games. And this is where all the story came to a start. And then going from there, he shaped up a game where you, as a player, have to overcome, the threats of being one of the survival of a new wave of colonists out on Mars. And to do so, you will have to together work with other players to build up, a new colony on Mars, and to ultimately establish a new colony out there.
It seems like there are a lot of games hitting Steam and other marketplaces in the last year or so that are, I don't want to say similar, but like that delve into survival gameplay and survival elements. And I wonder, as a team that's currently deeply enmeshed in like proving out those systems and polishing those systems, what do you think it is that is so appealing to players about survival-based games?
Well, I think there are multiple factors in survival games nowadays. You have survival by engaging with other players in a PvP aspect, and that's most of those survival games that initially brought that that wave onto the market. Made those that the survival make sure that the survival first was surviving other players. There is then a trend, that came with Ark and those dinosaur things, where you have to survive other things on the game than players, zombies and dinosaurs and everything. And what we try to accomplish here with Rokh is to limit very much the PvP factor. We have no PvP currently in the game. We really wanted to make sure that the survival aspect was the core system, alongside with the very deep crafting and building mechanism that supported those survival. You have to survive the planet. You have to, to address your fundamental needs as a human being, being sent out there to colonize the red planet. And I think this is really something that appeals to players, because everyone at some point say, what will I do in such situation? Will I be well equipped mentally, physically, to actually run such an experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think what really attracted us to this project and why we begged some of your time today is that all of you have lengthy and meaningful careers in the game industry, but not, to the best of our knowledge, you aren't known for games like this. So I kind of want to know how you all got wrapped up in this project, and sort of more importantly, like what you've learned from your time producing, like, what is it, an early access survival game.
I personally, I think it will be more relevant for Randy and Viktor even. But I personally, working at Ubisoft on all those AAA online games, you have a certain reference of what a game is and how you make it. And it was very helpful in my particular area to really see what online games is and understand the needs for producing such a game. And applying that to an early access with limited resources and having to find the quick wins and the best solutions to be able to put in motion such a game and present it to a community early on, so we can build up on it, was really interesting. And I think that there are so many things that we use as reference coming from the AAA industry that we wish to be able to replicate in early access that we didn't, and some things that we learned in this early access that I foresee as, we should definitely try to see how that cope with the AAA production, and I think this is some of the things that are really appreciated coming from AAA space to more indie early access kind of vibe. But Randy and Viktor, I'm sure you have other things as well.
No pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, I just like a variety of development challenges and so forth. Like, I started off on what was called AAA games back in the 90s. So we're talking about like the Thief series. And it was like first-person immersive sim action adventure. The lineage that later became things like Dishonored. And then, eventually wound up with my own indie studio, and we were doing like platformers, and one was a very environmental storytelling puzzler, and then the next one was like about artificial life and ecosystems, and the budgets had changed by multiple orders of magnitude, and the audience and the screen size and play patterns, and I'm just really interested in those kinds of things. And I think the thing that's interesting to me about early access is the relationship with your community. And we've seen that shift over the years, where back in the 90s at Looking Glass, like, we had to put a physical disc in a box and send it to people, and there was no patching it per se. I mean, there was, but it was, you couldn't rely on it the same way, because people had to go to the website and download it and install it, and it took an hour. When as Tiger Style releasing on mobile markets, I mean, like, there was constant updates, and they happened transparently in the background, and a lot of users did it. And now we're even further, we're in early access. It's like, wait, this game, we're just making this game now. It's not done yet. We got some of the basic stuff in there. It's playable. It's fun. It looks good. What do you think? Here's where we think we're going to go. What do you guys think we should be doing? And I think that's a really interesting and fun space to be, to like kind of collaborate with your audience to make a game.
Viktor, how about you? I'd be curious to know what has been new and challenging for you working on a project like this as compared to projects like, like Dishonored or even going all the way back to Half-Life 2 and that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'll sort of put a context to what I do in this business is basically, I'm very interested in fiction and science fiction, visual narration. And games being a visual media more than a talking heads radio media, I'm trying to first establish the a sense of a place and a world and a universe with some depth. And since I'm a science fiction fan, and most of my projects have been sci-fi projects, except for Dishonored that's been labeled steampunk, which I'm totally comfortable with, but it wasn't meant to be in the beginning. I love the opportunity of creating sci-fi worlds, and I really like realistic classical science fiction. That's number one. So, of course, I've never done a project on Mars, on another planet. Usually I bring aliens to Earth in my projects, or weirdness to big metropolises like London or New York or Los Angeles. So that's the first time I'm doing a project that's happening on another planet. So that was a challenge, and that's interesting for me. And then I'll talk about the difference and the similarities between AAA projects and, let's say, indie projects. The pre-production process shouldn't change. So the story, the world has to be very pretty deep and profound, and it has to have its own logic. So you have to feel like you're on Mars. So the quality of the drawings, the quality of the writing, the quality of the lighting, and all the tools we use, like architecture, crafting, and just designing the mountains, the landscapes, doesn't go down in a small project. What would be the trade-off in a smaller project and lower budget project would be the post-production process and the time, the size of the team. But usually pre-production I've always done with about 5 people, one concept, one character designer, one writer, one environmental designer, including myself very often, and one industrial designer. And this is the core team that creates a new world. And last but not least, this is a new IP. And this was my challenge my whole life, to look for new IPs or reboot an existing IP in a meaningful way. And it's very rare to just get an opportunity to work on a brand new IP, which is Rokh, and try to build it from scratch. So these were the challenges here.
Victor, I'm going to follow up with a question on, you talked about your style is influenced by classic science fiction. What particular works of science fiction would you say you were most thinking of when you were working on Rokh?
Well, first of all, I mean, we can go to literature, things like, Stanislav Lem and 70s, 80s science fiction. Then we'd go to, of course, to Ridley Scott right away, with Blade Runner. But I was lucky enough to have Sid Mead, the designer of Blade Runner, be one of my professors at Arthur. So, it's about 70s, 80s. That's what I call science fiction. Well, it was a big time, and then it disappeared for a while. Now it's coming back. But classical science fiction, you can't do better than the original Blade Runner, for example, or Space Odyssey and things like this. 70s, 80s. Profound space explorations and science fiction stories.
Yeah, can you share what you think about that aesthetic has been most functional in your work in games? Like, what do you think about that aesthetic really makes games like Rokh look so distinct?
Well, that's a simple one for me. First of all, you have the sense of scale that matters a lot. And when you're on Mars, you're an ant, you're very small, and Mars is monumental. So all of a sudden you have these themes from epic westerns or adventure stories like Lawrence in Arabia. You're an individual in a huge dominating world. So it's a sense of scale and being lost and dominated by your landscape. Second of all, lighting. Light is a language, so we can have very realistic lighting, very mysterious lighting. So that's why we have this 24 cycle lighting in Rokh. The atmosphere changes as you go through. And the next one is the industrial design. So of course we're planning to have vehicles that are already pre-designed, and we have machines and we have the suits, and that's another language that's very specific. So if you take spaces, light, atmosphere, and industrial machines, that sort of does the mix.
Nice. Randy, I'm going to switch a question over for you. You said before the call that you're something of a more recent addition to the team, and you're still working out of Austin, beautiful Austin, Texas. What got you excited? What kind of like puzzles are you trying to solve with Rokh? And you talked earlier about how you love the design challenges of every new kind of game, and what's got you excited right now about your work here?
Yeah, so I came to the project in about February of this year. So a lot of the concepts of design work and so forth had already been done by the core team and Visio out of Montreal. And as Vincent mentioned, the Darewise team sort of proposed the initial concept. So, now it's released, and what we see in the game at present is that it's like a very good, realistic, sort of hardcore survival game set on Mars, kind of like Vincent talked about. Hey, you've been dropped down to the surface in a tiny little pod. There was barely enough room for you and some basic equipment. Start building yourself up from scratch, build your own habitat, seal it, pressurize it, make sure it's got oxygen, start automating your ways to collect energy or water or basic survival stuff. So it's got this very deep crafting and building system, and it's got a very science-focused, pretty realistic survival system. So that's kind of there's more there. There's a bunch more there, but that's like the platform on which we're building. And so as I said, what I think is interesting is sort of engaging with the community and seeing how they're responding to this stuff, which is something you don't usually get to do in design. You have to make guesses about how people are going to respond. So we can actually see them respond in real time. And, there's the obvious kind of fixing bugs that we weren't able to identify before releasing, now that it's in the hands of so many more players and stuff. But then we get kind of the more interesting things that you hear about in an early access game, which is what's more interesting to people, getting to a place where, which feature should we pursue next? Is it growing your own food, which is something that we've been talking about internally in the team for a while, is what Viktor just mentioned, being able to craft and design your own vehicles so you can move around the surface more quickly. We're not going to do a basic PvP like you might see in another game. This isn't a shooting game, but there is a notion of different colonies being hostile as they compete over resources, and that can become violent, and that will factor back in your habitat or base building or colony building kind of stuff. So there's so many different places we could go, and we get to kind of put the tendrils out into the community and see what they seem most interested in, or how their play patterns are emerging. What are they actually doing? And so that's kind of the thing I think is going to be really interesting in the future. So it's sort of it's like people talk about it. It's this co-development between the audience and the development team.
What surprised you about the community? Because we had like I said, we had the Conan early access guys on, and they were telling us how they were consistently flabbergasted by they'd put out the priorities list and say, okay, here's our priorities. You guys arrange them how you think we should handle it, and they got this list back that they didn't know anything about. What surprised you the most about what they were
totally shocked? I know. What do you think, Vincent? Has there been anything in particular that's been really shocking?
Nothing at this point really shocking, I guess. There are things that we would have expected to being thrown at us a bit more frequently, I don't know, the lack of vehicles to explore, or the lack of PvP, and it was actually that the players came back to us with. It was more that they wanted to go even a bit further with what they had right now and be able to access it even more easily. I think the main element that we got from them is that they want us to continue on that path of having something deep and modular, and being able to present them with more variety on that front, and going into this avenue, keeping this right way, and adding more variety to that. That being said, it's still very early. We only have a couple of weeks behind us, and we all already see that people consume the content obviously very differently from what we expected sometime, and this is a good sign because it means that the system and the systemic aspect of the game works. If you only predict, then it means that you cut off some creativity from your players, and that we don't want. And especially now that we have Randy on board, we want to pursue this avenue of offering a real toolbox to the players' creativity and expand on that.
Right. It's a good question. I think if people know some of my past work at like Looking Glass and so forth, like where we want to go is in a place where players are using their and they are already doing a little bit of this, obviously, but like we want to provide them with the kind of tools that they can use in ways that really surprise we the developers. Where they automate this crazy system of conveyor belts that goes into an underground mine to extract resources, and they go straight into their smelter, which refines them, and they pull them out and they go back to their crafting table, and that immediately builds out tiles that someone else is using to create, to expand on their habitat or whatever. And a lot of that, what I just mentioned, is actually already possible in the game, but not all of it, And so I think one of the things we're looking for is where are players trying to express their creativity or create their own systems, and how much variety can we get? Like if you're a player who's really focused on this kind of colony, are you able to build it? If you're a player focused on this kind, can you build that one? Or are they all different? And so that's where I think we're hoping to take it.
And
how do you know? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, sorry. I just wanted to mention one example, for instance, of that is that with the building system we put in place in Rokh, we wanted to offer something a bit in the vibe of Minecraft, where you pull tiles by tiles, so frame by frame, and you are able to shape your habitat the way you want. And we had this on the same path. We wanted to also offer very realistic things like you have a door, you have a corridor, and you pressurize that and everything. And we already have players that said, oh no, I don't want to use the tile, I want to use the door, which are a very expensive items to craft compared to a tile, to be able to craft gigantic habitat made only with doors, so I can go and reach this top of mountain more easily, and then create a path from ground up, and that's the kind of thing we want to continue to expand on, with the set of tools we give them.
Oh, that specific example is actually a terrible idea, because normally you want to create an airlock so that when you open one door, you don't decompress your habitat. So if you make your entire habitat out of doors, you kind of have a porousness problem. But
I was gonna say, I was just thinking of a structure made of doors, and I got a little nightmarish image in my head.
Yeah. I mean, it's complex. I wonder, how do you know when a game like this is done?
I think that's a very good question. We're gonna have to figure out. I mean, how many of the early access games have reached conclusion? Like not Ark, not DayZ.
Yeah.
Z1, not Long Dark.
Minecraft, I guess. We don't even think of it as an early access game anymore, but that did start out. It wasn't even on Steam early access, but it was you were playing alphas and betas before you were playing the original one. I'm going to bounce Alex's question to Victor. Victor, how do you sort of think about when your work will be done?
Concerning Rokh, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So for me, I mean, traditionally, this is a new experience for me, because most of the games I've done before were very story-driven. Mm-hmm. And here the story is pretty much up to the player and the community. So for now, I'm trying to think of a modular system that would allow the players to learn about the logic of the world and have some kind of a storyline dictated by, there needs to be, for me, a little bit of a designer's presence, even if the game is procedural and crafting. But we have to be very subtle in the way that we design the pieces of the puzzle so they're meaningful, and so the player can start designing their own story. Mm-hmm. So some things we're working on is a subtle backstory that will appear through the materials, the crafting, the landmarks that you see around you, and just discover as you go along what has happened to this world. So this is my challenge now. Shooting the guy into this open world with all these just building blocks, and as he builds the blocks, he will discover what happened before and what's the backstory and what's the logic of the world. So this is my challenge to sort of, imagine the story backwards, starting day one with no story at all, with no backstory, with no context. You're just on Mars. As you go along and you discover the machines, you discover the landscapes, you discover the landmarks and what's happened before, you end up with a backstory and with something that's emotional and meaningful.
Yeah, the game's very not pushy about its backstory, but it's actually in there. Like, there's a reason that you arrive on the planet, and there's this history of the first wave of colonists and things that happened to them. There's a lot of things you can discover and learn, like factual pieces of information, as you sort of explore the entire enormous map and find different landmarks that belong to different organizations that have been on Mars for some amount of years, and why all these places are now abandoned and all the people are dead. And the story goes that you receive this pamphlet in the mail, and you're the special astronaut candidate who is invited to fly down onto Mars and try to become a second wave colonist on a very fixed budget.
So I guess the piece of news here, and to complete Randy's answer and my first part of the answer is that we actually have a backstory. We have characters, and there's something that happened on Earth before we go there, and we want to reveal this in a very organic way.
Can we see that pamphlet again? I'm just kind of, he just kind of reached out and pulled out a pamphlet, and I was like, wait, what if that actually arrived in the mail?
So let's let's talk about.
You can actually download it and print it out. I really wanted people to be able to hold it in their hands.
Yeah.
Ooh.
The organization.
That's the true immersive sim, when you can actually invite people to Mars.
Yeah. So let's dig into storytelling for a second, if you guys are up for it. In talking about trying to tell a story almost passively, through the world and through like setting it up reverse, so that you try to figure out what's going on and then leave clues in the environment for the player to discover at their own pace. It reminds me a lot of your prior works, including Randy with Spider. I think of Spider, there's whole narrative arcs in there that are not expressly told to the player directly. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if, what have you guys learned about telling a story elegantly through game design, and would you offer any advice to other developers looking to do something similar?
My answer, we could be here for the next several weeks.
Let's do it.
One of the things I've studied the most in my career and worked on. Maybe Viktor can start, and I'll see where to pick up after he. I know he has an original take on this as well from his work on Dishonored and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, I can roll back to things like Kingpin, if anybody remembers that game that was done with Zatrix Entertainment. It was a Quake 2 engine game. It was a gangster Los Angeles game with science fiction elements.
Yeah. I remember Kingpin.
And the voices were done by Cypress Hill, so was the music, and they were in the offices all the time. And we did field trips with them downtown LA to do some research about the universe. But the first part of storytelling for me is the context and the backstory. And I'll refer again to Blade Runner, because you have to write what happened to the place about 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and then take it to today. So context is the first part. And that means equals visual storytelling. You get off the airplane somewhere, you see the light, the architecture, the people, and then you know a lot about the place already without having it spelled out for you with a voiceover. So first part of storytelling is the context and the architecture, and where am I, and what's the state of affairs in this place. And then you have to guide the player with visual clues, to put it in a very simple way. Wide spaces, narrow spaces, landmarks, where do I want to go? This is very much an old architectural trick since the Renaissance. I have a monument or church, I'd like to go this way. I have a broad avenue, do I choose the little back street or do I follow the big boulevard? So it's by spatial design that you drive the interest of the player. And then every once in a while you deliver a climatic point where something happens. And that's a beat of a story. So in Half-Life 2, what we did was we didn't have cinematics. but we had story moments during exploration.
So I think you're right.
Story moments.
I want to get to Randy and Vincent as well in a second, but I want to go back. Victor, what was it like to hang out with Cypress Hill and go on research trips to LA? What was could you expand on that a little bit?
I was a fan at the time, so it was good.
It was good. All right, cool. Work on Kingpin was good.
They don't.
You know, of all the rappers that you've hung out with and gone on research trips with, how would you rank Cypress Hill?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are they the most chill?
That was a question for you, Victor. Okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's also Latino rap, so it was a special brand of rap, and I really like it. I mean, Latinos are a huge, great part of Los Angeles, so I really enjoy being around them.
Nice. Randy, which rappers have you hung out with in the course of your game development research?
Man, that's a good question. I may have, for all I know.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't know. I did work with Steven Spielberg for quite a while there when I was at Electronic Arts, and
Right.
then the people who would walk in the room.
How's Steven's rap?
Steven is probably not a good rapper, but he's got a lot of other positive qualities. But like, you know, we'd be in a meeting, and then J.J. Abrams would walk in and be like, "Hey, Steven, how's it going?" Like, literally happened.
I'm going to sidetrack on the story question just to actually. Game development is obviously not. I mean, lately you have like Glixel Rock like claiming it's the new rock and roll or whatever. But I mean, you don't think of game development as a career for the most part, where you get to like hobnob with people whose faces all over the world. But what's it like when your work? How does it feel when your work intersects with someone whose personality is larger than life? Like, how does it feel to try and be doing your normal, either in Victor, in your case, your art, Randy, your design? How does it feel to suddenly sort of like be riding shotgun with people who get their heads turned on the streets?
I mean, my experience from working with extremely high-profile creatives is that they're a lot like, you know, my favorite creatives from games.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a certain charisma that makes people famous, but there's also people who don't have that charisma, who are very talented, you know. And so when I think about like my favorite, you know, indie developers are super talented and they're great to work with, and we have like a good rapport, and I admire the creativity. I feel kind of the same way about people like Steven Spielberg. I'm like, wow, this guy's super talented. He just happens to embody this charisma. You know, like you hear people talk about Bill Clinton, that he can't walk into a room and like just instinctively everybody turns to look at him or whatever. You know, there's just some people who have that. It doesn't necessarily mean they're more or less talented.
Victor, do you have any thoughts about how it affected your work? Like I'm just kind of curious, just because game development.
Well, I mean, if we have to talk about one of the major figures in today's game industry, this is Gabe Newell.
Yeah.
I was lucky to work with him at the age of 26, when Valve was still a relatively small creative studio before Half-Life 2, just right after Half-Life 1.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a person bigger than life. The thing that defines for me great people is that they don't micromanage. They have an instinct about people, and they can very quickly understand what can you bring into the collaboration. So everybody who's been of a very high profile, let's say, they're very open-minded and free, and that's a mark. That's a mark for greatness, when you don't micromanage, but you understand everybody's qualities and you let them do their best. And it applies to movie directors. It applies to game directors. Is when you take somebody for what he's good at and you give him freedom.
Yeah, right on.
That's actually, yeah. I guess I'll let Alex get his answer out of Randy about story and background story now.
Right. Yeah. No. Let's talk about what you're good at, Randy, which is probably level design. I'd assume you've been doing it for quite some time, game design. Victor made a good point that basic architectural concepts, studying the way people move through space, is really valuable when you're trying to sort of subtly tell a story without hitting a player over the head with it. I would wonder what your thoughts might be on that subject after doing it for 20 plus years.
Yeah, I mean, again, I could talk for until we're all dead, and I won't do that. But I guess one of the high concept points I would probably bring out here is in something that sort of ties together a lot of the games that we're talking about with Rokh, is this notion of like push versus pull story. Like a push story is one where you're trying to play the game and it stops you with the cinematics. Like, hold on, stop playing the game for a second. It's like you get to see some talking heads and they're giving story out or whatever, and then it turns it back over and you're allowed to keep playing. So that's the developers pushing the story at you. And that was kind of like a traditional way to tell stories in games for a long time. Because it inherits from the other media like books and movies. Like it's time for story, here it comes. And I think one of the things that it's been around forever, but one of the things we saw championed at Looking Glass, and some of the other things we talked about, such as Dishonored, Arcane Studios has done a ton of this. My own studio, Tiger Style, has done a lot. Is this notion of pull stories where it's sort of like built into the environment, or you have to kind of go find it, and like you're more like a detective, right? You're like finding little clues and trying to figure out how they fit together. And so you're putting together the story yourself. And there's a lot of advantages of this approach. One of them is that it doesn't interrupt the player, so you don't have the Metal Gear Solid 2 problem of like, hey, 45 minutes from now you get to start playing this video game you just bought. And instead, it's only when the player wants to engage with story that they go do so. In our game in Spider, we push this to the extent that, like, hey, if you don't care about the story at all, you just never have to touch it. Like, it's there, it's always kind of around you, and if you just want to be a spider and you don't care about this human story, you just never have to engage with it. And I think all games that have this have it to some degree. So in Rokh, there is a backstory, and if you're the kind of player who's like, I just really want to know what happened here, I see all these ruined, settlements, and I see evidence of this, like, nuclear explosion that I've been hearing about, and I just really want to figure it out, then you can go sort of engage and pull the story out and figure out what happened. But you don't have to. And so there's just like a lot of advantages, I think, to the pull story. I mean, push stories are great too. I think that's a different type of interactivity, a different audience. But Rock's got a pull story. And again, I don't want to take too much credit. Like, this is really the core team who wrote and implemented the story. But it's in there, and it's pretty interesting. When I got into it in February, I was pretty impressed by how much is there and how interesting it is.
Nice. Yeah, I think, pull stories are much better suited, I think, for early access than push stories, right? I don't think it's impossible to do either one that way, but having this kind of iterative live development approach is sort of, it's hard to do if you're trying to tell a strong narrative succinctly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and push stories are typically, associated with, content-driven games that have levels, stories, characters, scenes, and that kind of thing. And most early access games, it makes a lot more sense for them to be systems-driven games where it's about survival or crafting or building or, the types of things that are in these games. Because those are the systems you can, that's the game mechanics that you can iterate over time and keep improving. It'd be a little weird. I mean, I know there are some games like this, but that have like very concrete fixed stories that you're iterating over time to a live audience. So it's a dicey proposition. Some people have done it, but in Rokh, it's not that case. This is a survival crafting building game that happens to have a backstory.
Totally.
I'm going to jump in. Oh, Victor, you were going to say something?
I was just going to add something. We specifically don't use the word plot because some games are plotted, some don't have a plot but a story. And a story is just a string of emotional moments and climatic moments that you run into. And then you go back to exploration and you lower the level of intensity, and then you run into another a climatic moment. That's great. But this is no plot. And some games have a very specific Hollywood-like written out plot.
I'm going to. I love talking about story myself, but I'm going to move off to another discussion point. Vincent, we were talking before the stream started about shared server goals, about building certain structures. That's like kind of like this is what you want everyone on a given server to be doing. And you said a group of players on one server are making progress on like some kind of mega structure. Could you tell us about designing those kind of gameplay features and how you get players interested in building a superstructure like that without sabotaging each other? How do you prevent the Tower of Babel, if you will?
Yeah, actually, this is all part of. we didn't want to prevent sabotaging. I mean, this is also part of the game. You'll see that in the backstory, in the story, you have different groups of entities that are engaged in the Mars exploration and Mars colonization, and some have conflict in interest. But and that we want to give the players the ability while trying to achieve those community objective or server-based objectives, to exactly role play those entities, and try to sabotage each other while trying to achieve those things. So the design was more of making sure that it's well exposed and that you have to cooperate, because in many of those games, and this is something that we wanted to bring in Rokh as well, is okay, how do you push the players to engage with each other in the game directly, and not having to create a side path or a side thing for them to create groups and to set up a common goal, because in all of those sandbox games you don't have a goal per se, you set up your own goal, and with setting that up, we offer the possibility to each group of players and each servers to evolve differently and to tell their own story again. So the design was more of, okay, here is something that will take a group of people a large amount of time to set, and that will impact the rest of the players on the server, and therefore some will be up to it, some will not. So it will create that emergence of cooperation or not.
Fair.
Randy, have you gotten to work on those superstructure designs at all? And do you have any thoughts about their purpose and their creation?
I haven't joined with other players who are creating the superstructures, but I mean, those aren't designed, right? Those are created by players themselves. I think they're awesome. I mean, that is kind of the thing that we are hoping for in the future, is that players will use these tools that we've given them, which are pretty flexible and pretty high granularity, and just figure out some cool, interesting things to do with them, whether that's a house built entirely out of doors.
To clarify, and
Sure.
maybe just getting the feature, I may be describing it wrong. This is like a specific shared goal, like that you guys are setting for the players, right? Or do the players set them themselves?
The goals are designed by us and by Invisio team, and we expand on those goals.
That's what I was asking, Randy.
The community objective? Is that the one we're talking about?
Community objectives,
Yeah. Got it. Sorry. Yes, those are going to be really cool, I think. They're so basically in Rokh, it's like you land, you've got almost nothing, you have to build yourself up from scratch, you want to create your own habitat, it's an open sandbox for you to figure out what to do, and that's cool, and I think people get it, like I got to survive. And then there's this backstory you can go and explore. And you can try to build colonies, but there's all these different directions you can go for yourself. But then there is the layer of like the game designers or the game's fiction sort of encouraging you towards certain things. And so these are sort of our community objectives, and they are going to be, there's one already, and we're going to keep releasing them. We're sort of like playing the role of everyone back on Earth who's like helping you figure out what you should be doing on Mars. So the first community objective is to build these transmitters, like antennas, to make contact back. Part of the backstory is that it's hard to make communication between Earth and Mars, and that you have to like build these mega antenna to help make that communication more reliable. And so that's the first one, and then we're going to use that as sort of the platform to introduce more and more. So instead of all these player-driven objectives, it is like the designer saying, like, now let's see if you can do this. And those tend to come with like new recipes or new objectives you can fulfill. So this one, there is a recipe for a mega antenna that you're following with everybody else. And in the future, we'll introduce new recipes that are also a part of those.
What makes a good community objective? Like, what's a good one, and what's like one that players just reject or feel is too, like, I'm curious what makes something like, it's such kind of a meta, it's a meta game kind of deal, like it's outside that immersion game design. I'm curious what makes one good and another not good.
I think they're pretty emergent. I think I'm going to answer you from a designer point of view. It's less about how players will respond to it and more about like what kind of player behaviors we're trying to encourage or possibilities for players to have. And so this first one's kind of an obvious, like, hey, you've got a very big task to do, and you have to get pretty advanced, like, how do you want to go about trying to accomplish it? And so it encourages players to like collaborate and sort of like look at this recipe and figure out how to optimize their manufacturer or their crafting sort of stuff to get there most quickly and so forth. But the future ones, I think, they'll probably have a little bit more sort of like high-level flexibility for the players in terms of like, ooh, are we trying to pursue this one that'll appeal to this organization or this other one? And they have different requirements, and they have different risks-reward profiles, and so put that back into the community to try to figure out where they're going to go, or are they going to try to go in multiple directions at once? And we're really just trying to create almost they're big tasks for the players, but they're also sort of like political questions for the players. Like, well, where do you think you should be going, and which do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of the things I'm kind of most interested in terms of trying to interact with these large groups of players. There's a lot of different servers, but we only get to put out like one objective for for one build that goes across all the servers. So what we really want is to see to create an objective and see players on each server sort of going in different directions or approaching it differently.
Yeah,
that means we've done something right.
Victor, I'm kind of curious. I mean, what we're talking about is kind of outside the world of visual art and visual design. But when you're, do you get to have any thoughts about these community objectives and how they sort of the creations that they have and how they interact with the aesthetic you're trying to build?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is related to fiction because you can imagine a community wanting to build the mega structure, eventually defend themselves, or you can imagine players that would create a group of scavengers that would want to destroy everything. So it's interesting to give some incentives to encourage people to choose how do they want to play. Do I want to be a pirate or a scavenger? Or do I want to be a lord and build and have like a castle around me? And the very modular tile system allows these completely opposite ways. And we mentioned vehicles. I don't know if they'll come later down the road.
But down the road.
We can, exactly, yeah. But we can imagine fictionally and design-wise mega structures with a huge community that feels like a town or a city, or sort of a hermit lone wolf kind of gameplay where you have your own hut and you go getting resources and you're on your own, or you can have an aggressive behavior and just go rob and attack. So this is for me the different kind of structures you will have: a loner, a complete sort of Mad Max scavenger, or a town builder. And the size of the cities wouldn't be gigantic, but it's sort of an equivalent of a Western city, because even the Mars landscape is similar to a Western, and then you can have a sort of a town in the middle of nowhere, and that's a great fictional design piece that the whole players would get to do.
And also, something I wanted to say about that is that with Viktor, Randy, the team of designers at Invisio, we are building this world. We are building the IP, and not everything is set in stone right now. And those type of community objective where give us the opportunity to bring something in this world, in this IP, in a non-linear way, in a obvious way for the player, like dropping a new item on the map, or opening the map to something new without having a context. Those type of things where we want to introduce something new to the backstory, new to the IP, expanding the worlds. Those type of things, those type of tools we set in the game allows us to do it, in a positive way for the players.
Something that's been on my mind since we started talking, and this may have been covered already, so I apologize if so. Why is it called Rokh, and why is it called Rokh with a KH?
I was just thinking that.
Me too.
That's for me, I guess. Okay. Actually, Rokh, spelled this way, comes from a Persian language and stands for phoenix, so raising up from the ashes.
Oh yeah.
So
like
it's the spirit of creating a new colony and establishing a new life on a new planet, right from the ashes of what the Red Planet offers.
You guys weren't expecting an answer that good, were you?
It has nothing to do with Dwayne Johnson, right?
We are big fans of The Rock. Okay.
Who
So
isn't?
if eventually it will make a movie or something about it, about being on space and being an explorer on Mars, and it will be a perfect character for this game. Although we need probably to revise the suit size a bit.
He's already been to Mars though, because he was in the Doom movie. So maybe he's feeling a little Marsed out.
Yeah, it's in the Mars Avenue. Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of Mars, God, I understand that reference because it's similar to how Zelda mangled that word to create the rocks items for the 2D games. We've learned a lot about Mars in this last 20, 30 years or so, I'd say. We've learned that Matt Damon is up there waiting for us to get him back. What about the scientific knowledge of Mars that we've acquired has inspired you all on this journey? Like, what is it about the red planet that makes you think take an introspective look at your work?
It's true that like in the last 10 years, we've just seen so much more, people imagining what life would be like on Mars, between like Elon Musk and National Geographic having a special Mars colonization terraforming issue every like 14 months and The Martian and so forth, the film with Matt Damon. It's like we've just this fantasy of what it would be like to be on Mars and try to survive has been really pushed on us for a long time. I'm going to go ahead and take credit as being one of the early ones who was up in there early, since my company released Waking Mars back in 2012. So that's something we've been interested in for like 7 years. I don't know. I think it's interesting because like the moon was the 60s planet that we were all interested in trying to get to, and now we're here in the 2000s, and it's sort of like the next big step for humankind to get further out into space. And instead of like the white bone colored dusky thing close to Earth, it's just like this beautiful red cold distant thing, and it's just kind of where the zeitgeist about space is right now.
Yeah, I guess I gotta admit, like I assumed like the naming thing was just an effort to stand out on Steam. Like you didn't want to just be Rokh with a CK. This is a way better story. But like that also like
there's also a bunch of rocks on Mars.
Sure,
that's true.
It's nothing but rocks,
that was the first thought, and then we're like, we can probably spin this though.
It's like one big rock. But I wonder what has your experience been like trying to gather an audience on Steam? In the last couple of years, there's been a lot of sturm and drang about discoverability and like the glut of games in the marketplace. And I kind of wanted to get your experience now with an early access game in 2017.
Yeah, I guess it's still a challenge. Honestly, it's still a challenge. You need to find tricks, in the good way to stand out. But the strategy we pursue with this game is that we try to create as much as we can of the community, all along the development. We as soon as we announced the game, back in 2015, in December 2015, we've been very open with the fact that we wanted to build a community. So we shared a lot of things, from concept design, from design, tries. And we tried to gather those groups of people interested all along the development up until we were able to bring them something playable, this year. And then ultimately it comes to engaging with your core audience at first and create this grassroots, appeal and grassroots layer of players that will eventually become your ambassadors and call off the rest of the community to come. And then there is a more traditional marketing efforts that we try to pursue, especially with the content creators. We've got a tremendous answers from them when we presented the game, and interest from them coming at us, say, hey guys, this is looking awesome. I would like to stream that to my audience and expand on it. And that how right now we have a community of super engaged players. We're very proud of them. They are helping us on every front, tracking the bugs, helping us to guide the newcomers to this game and to the experience. So we're very happy, and we want to continue to expand on this community building strategy. With having them telling us what they want, what they experience, and how they want to play the game. So we can definitely create the set of tools again that they will use to express their creativity and to call up other players at some point. The core audience we want to try to reach right now are those very hardcore builders and survival gamers. But at some point, I think the objective is also to be progressively reaching out with a set of features and accessibility and visual appeal to a bit more of a broader audience.
I'm going to interrupt Alex. I saw you moving there. We have some questions in the chat, and we are going to get to these before we finish up our hour with you all here today. The first is a comment, but I'm going to turn it into a question. GH Reaper says the game looks really promising, but they're having trouble getting into the structure building. Block by block isn't their thing. I'm curious if you've gotten that kind of feedback from other players who've sort of wanted bigger tools for building. Like I know other games. I'm thinking of Fallout 4 in my case. Have just let you build the wall, like the wall tile, instead of like the 20 tiles that make up the wall. I'm curious if you've thought of implementing something like that.
Yeah. The really short answer is that's the kind of place we're going. I mean, if I was to tie this back to the question that we were just talking about, it's like one of the things I've noticed is that the standards for an early access game have gone up really sharply in the past year or two. Like, to my mind, I think Rokh looks really beautiful. Credit to Viktor and the Invisio team. Very polished, and it's got tons of features. It's got a closed loop. There's tons of things you can do. But even so, I think because there's early access games that have been around for 3 years or longer that are so fully featured and so polished and beautiful, I think we draw comparisons to those sometimes. And right now, we got Rokh out as early as we could so that people could start giving us feedback about it. And if you're on the bleeding edge, hardcore, want to check out the new games and help influence their direction, this is the time to join Rokh and help us figure out where it should go. And if you want something that's a little bit smoother and more polished and so forth, I might wait a month or two or something. I'm not sure exactly how long. But that, this question is kind of about that. It's right now, if you want to build an enormous habitat, it's one tile at a time. It's on the schedule that we're going to try to do some sort of prefab things. There's some questions to be figured out there, is it large prefabs that we design for you? Can you make macros of your own prefab so that you can design your own things more quickly? And then a bunch of user interface type stuff that we have to figure out to make that work smoothly.
Yeah.
Next, I would like to add just one small thing to this.
Sure.
Because I happened to work with ZeniMax until a year ago, and I was lucky to contribute to Fallout 4. And the important thing here is to identify the core players, hardcore crafting versus more vague exploration experience. Mm-hmm. And we're fine-tuning this, but yes, I think things could go either way. We can have easier construction and bigger blocks and more automatic building blocks, but we need to identify what the players really want from this.
Yes. I'm going to ask, before I get to a bigger question, I'm going to ask a short, one player is asking for advice. Alex012773 is asking, how can they use solar panels and get the wiring inside their building without leaving gaps in their ceilings or walls?
There is a position for wires called the push-through position. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Pass-through. The pass-through position. So when you install wires or pipes on a surface, on a tile, you can kind of use the mouse wheel and it rotates between all these different L-shapes, keys, and because all those things are relevant to the circuit and its properties. And one of them is the pass-through, which goes through the center of the tile. It kind of just looks like a dot in the middle, but if you flip around and look at the other side of the tile, you'll see that it's over there. Then you apply another wire, and then now you've got it shrunk through without breaking a seal on your habitat.
So there you go, Alex. If you're still out there.
And hopefully that's a little bit of an advertisement for the depth and sophistication of the systems that are in this game. So as I said, it's a very early release, but there's still a ton of stuff in there if you're kind of a player who gets into the wonkiness of very sophisticated, highly granular building stuff.
There's your answer. Oh, sweet. Alex got the answer, so I'm glad we helped them. And Kenya Babagra is asking, they wonder why they can't visit and salvage the abandoned bases that they see on Mars.
It's another thing that's in consideration. That we do present this really cool, these cool abandoned settlements that are telling a story. And one of the things we're thinking about in the future is what else can you do with them? Right now, they're sort of a nexus for resources or for players to meet up. In the future, you might be able to take them apart and use them in your own base, or you might be able to enter them and explore to learn more about the story.
Cool. Yeah, Alex is in the chat still, so I'll just confirm that uh, that like Randy said, it's a once you've scrolled the wheel, the pipe will it'll look like a circle on your side through the tile, but I guess it'll show up on the other side if that sounds right.
Yep, that's the pass-through.
Cool.
Also, I would recommend checking out, there's guides in the Steam community page for Rokh, and they're pretty thorough. So that answer happens to be in there. It might take a while to find the answers you're looking for, but that's a good reference.
Cool. Well, and Kenya, I was going to begin the wrap-up ceremonies, but Kenya asked another question about, this one's kind of for you, Victor, about those abandoned structures. How come they look so different than the structures that you're building? Like they aren't built out of the tile stuff; they're built out of something more conventional.
It's very simple, and that's the backstory. We'd be happy to reveal to players very soon, because it happened long time before the first colony.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mission 1 on Mars, and we're the second mission on Mars, and there's a big time gap, and something happened to the first mission that's to be discovered. So there you go, that's the answer. It's a different design style, it's a different technology style, and it happened long time before the current mission.
Gotcha. Kenya, I do appreciate that you have a lot of questions, but sadly, our hour has run up. Thank you so much to Victor, Randy, and Vincent for joining us. Thank you, Alex, for sort of co-piloting with me today. If you enjoyed this conversation with these fine developers, we encourage you to scroll down and click the follow button on the Gamasutra Twitch channel so that you can get more notifications about when we're chatting with other great game developers. We'll be back next week chatting with a few different developers on Wednesday and Friday about their games. Victor, Randy, and Vincent, is there anywhere you'd like players to go if they have more questions? And I guess if they have game development questions, not just questions about Rokh, but questions about making games like Rokh, where should they go?
Well, there are tons of avenue. I guess they can come and visit the Darewise website. You have contact there. We are answering pretty much every email that are not considered as spam. You have the Twitter of both the game if they're related, if your questions are related to game design or visual design for Rokh, or if you want a more general answers from Darewise vision on developing game. I guess there is the Darewise Twitter as well, so you're welcome in that.
And the Steam community is very active for Rokh, so if you go there, the developers will be happy to respond to you.
Yeah.
And Victor, anywhere, if they have art questions, is there anywhere you'd like to send them?
To Vincent.
Nice. Excellent answer. Alex, are you going to say something, or shall I sign off?
Please do. You got this.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This has been fun. This game looks really cool. Again, it is Rokh, for those of you at home, R-O-K-H. And I hope everyone at home has fun with the game. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Good chatting with
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
bye.